There are certain moments in life when your heart notices something before your mind is willing to admit it. For me, that moment arrived on the Tuesday afternoon. The envelope looked beautiful: cream colored paper, gold lettering, elegant handwriting. The kind of invitation most mothers dream of receiving. I stood at my kitchen counter in Savannah, Georgia, holding it in both hands. For a long moment, I simply stared at it. My son was getting married. After all these years, my Daniel was finally getting married. I should have felt nothing but happiness. And at first, I did. I smiled as I carefully opened the envelope. My fingers trembled slightly, not because of age, because of excitement. I had waited a long time for this day. Inside was a formal wedding invitation. Expensive, beautiful, far more luxurious than anything I had ever purchased for myself. I ran my fingers across the gold lettering: Daniel Harrison and Olivia Montgomery, together with their families, request the honor of your presence. The words blurred for a moment, not because I couldn't see them, because I suddenly remembered another little boy. A 7-year-old boy who used to run through our tiny apartment wearing a towel around his shoulders and pretending it was a superhero cape. A boy who once told me he would buy me a mansion when he grew up. A boy who promised I would never have to worry about money again. I smiled at the memory. Then I looked back at the invitation. The wedding would be held at Montgomery Manor, one of the most prestigious wedding venues in Georgia. The kind of place that appeared in magazines. The kind of place where wealthy people hosted weddings. Not people like me. Not seamstresses. Not widows living on a modest income. I set the invitation down and stared at it. For a moment, I felt proud. Daniel had built a successful life, a much bigger life than the one I'd been able to give him. And that was exactly what every mother hopes for, or so I told myself. The truth was more complicated, because over the past few years, something has changed. Not suddenly, slowly, quietly, like a crack forming beneath a foundation. Small at first, almost invisible, until one day you realize the entire structure has shifted. Daniel still called, sometimes. Daniel still visited, occasionally. Daniel still told people he loved me. But there was always a distance now, a careful distance, as though he were managing me instead of knowing me, as though I belonged to a chapter of his life he preferred not to revisit too often. I tried not to think about it. Mothers become experts at making excuses for the people they love. We're good at explaining away disappointments. He's busy, he's stressed, he's tired. He means well. Eventually, those explanations become habits. Then those habits become blindness. I picked up the invitation again. Something felt strange. I couldn't explain it immediately, but I kept reading. Then I saw it. No mention of family seating. No personal note, no message from Daniel, no handwritten card. Nothing. Just a formal invitation. Cold, polite, professional. The kind you might send to a coworker, not your mother. I immediately felt guilty for noticing. Maybe I was being sensitive. Maybe weddings were stressful. Maybe I was overthinking things. Still, the feeling remained. That evening, I called Daniel. He answered on the third ring. "Hey, Mom." His voice sounded distracted, like he was doing something else. "I got the invitation." "Oh, good." I waited, expecting more. There wasn't any. Finally, I laughed softly. "Your wedding?" "Yeah." Another pause. Another strange silence. "I can't believe it's finally happening." This time he laughed, a short laugh, polite, not warm. Me neither. I wanted to ask questions, hundreds of them. How are the plans going? Do you need help? Are you nervous? Are you excited? Instead, I found myself choosing my words carefully, as though I were speaking to someone else's son. When should I arrive? I asked. Oh, he paused, then said, the planner will send details. The planner, not him. The planner. Something inside me sank, just slightly. Not enough to hurt, enough to notice. We talked for another minute. Then he ended the call. As soon as I set my phone down, the apartment felt strangely quiet. Too quiet. I stared out the window, trying to convince myself everything was fine, trying not to feel hurt, trying not to wonder when my son had become a man who delegated conversations with his mother to wedding planners. The following week, I received a call from the venue. A young woman introduced herself as Madison. She sounded nervous, overly nervous. The conversation began normally: confirmation details, parking information, arrival times. Then she stopped. I could hear papers shuffling, computer keys clicking, more silence. Is everything all right? I asked. Yes, she answered quickly, too quickly. Then another pause. Finally, she said, Mrs. Harrison, I just wanted to verify your seating assignment. My seating assignment? That seemed oddly specific. Of course, more typing, more silence. Then something unexpected happened. The woman accidentally muttered something under her breath, a sentence she clearly hadn't intended me to hear. Again? I frowned. What was that? The line went completely silent. Then she laughed nervously. Nothing. But it wasn't nothing. I knew it wasn't. Because a moment later, she asked a very strange question. Have you spoken with your son recently? The question caught me off guard. What do you mean? Nothing. Another nervous laugh. Just making conversation. But it wasn't a conversation. It was something else. Something she didn't want to say. Something she wasn't supposed to say. My heart began beating faster. Not from fear, from instinct. That same instinct mothers develop after decades of raising children. The instinct that notices trouble before it arrives. I kept my voice calm. Madison. Yes? Has there been a problem? For a moment, I thought she might tell me. I thought she might reveal whatever was making her nervous. Instead, she lowered her voice and said something that would stay with me for days. Your seat has been changed 3 times this month. Silence. I felt my stomach tighten. What? Another pause. Then immediate panic, as though she realized she'd said too much. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that. Everything is fine. The call ended less than a minute later, but my thoughts didn't. Your seat has been changed 3 times this month. 3 times. I sat alone in my kitchen long after the conversation ended, trying to understand why, trying to find a reasonable explanation, trying not to imagine the possibilities. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe wedding plans change constantly. Maybe it meant nothing. But deep down, I already knew. Because sometimes your heart notices something before your mind is willing to admit it. And for the first time since receiving that invitation, I began wondering whether my son was trying to hide me. I just didn't know how far he was willing to go, yet. The morning of the wedding arrived bright and warm. Savannah was beautiful that day, the kind of beauty that seems almost unfair. Blue skies, gentle sunshine, a soft breeze moving through the trees. The kind of weather people pray for when planning an outdoor wedding. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror for a long time, longer than I wanted to admit. Not because I was trying to impress anyone. At 68 years old, those days were long behind me. I simply wanted to look respectable. I wanted to look like a mother attending her son's wedding. Nothing more, nothing less. I smoothed the navy blue dress I had purchased months earlier. It wasn't expensive, but it was elegant, simple, classic. My late husband had always said navy blue brought out the strength in my eyes. The memory made me smile. Then I ate. I missed him terribly on days like this. He should have been here. This should have been our day. We should have been sitting together watching our son get married. Instead, I stood alone. I picked up my purse and took one final look in the mirror. You raised him well, I whispered to myself. At least I hoped I had. An hour later, my taxi turned onto the long, private road leading to Montgomery Manor. The venue looked like something from a movie. White stone architecture, towering columns, perfect gardens. Luxury cars lined the entrance. Valets moved efficiently from vehicle to vehicle. Guests stepped out wearing designer dresses and expensive suits. For a moment, I felt underdressed. Not because my outfit was inappropriate, because everyone else looked impossibly wealthy. The taxi stopped. I paid the driver and stepped out. Immediately, I noticed something. Nobody seemed to know who I was. Normally, that wouldn't matter. But at a wedding, people usually recognize the groom's mother, at least eventually. Instead, guests passed me without a second glance. A few smiled politely. Most ignored me completely. I adjusted my purse strap and walked toward the entrance. Inside, the ballroom was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers hung from high ceilings. Fresh flowers filled the room. Soft music floated through the air. Staff members moved gracefully among arriving guests. Everything looked perfect, almost too perfect. A young woman carrying a clipboard approached me. Good afternoon. Her smile appeared forced. May I have your name? Eleanor Harrison. The moment I spoke my name, her expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough. A flash of recognition, followed by discomfort, then nervousness. The same nervousness I had heard in Madison's voice days earlier. She glanced at her clipboard, then at me, then back at the clipboard. Her smile disappeared. I'm sorry. She looked confused. One moment. She walked away quickly, too quickly. I stood alone near the entrance, watching guests laugh and greet one another. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Nobody returned. Nobody spoke to me. Nobody explained anything. Eventually, another coordinator appeared. This one looked equally uncomfortable. Mrs. Harrison? Yes, she swallowed. Would you follow me, please? The wording struck me immediately. Not this way, Mrs. Harrison. Not welcome. Now we're happy you're here. Simply follow me. I nodded anyway. She led me through the ballroom, past rows of beautifully decorated chairs, past reserved family seating, past sections marked for close relatives, past places where I assumed I would be sitting. We continued walking, further and further, until a strange feeling settled into my stomach. Something wasn't right. Then I saw it, a large decorative pillar, massive, beautifully designed, and positioned in exactly the wrong place, directly between the seating area and the altar. The coordinator stopped beside it. My heart sank. No, surely not. She looked at the seating card, then pointed. Here you are. I stared. For a moment, I honestly thought there had been a mistake. The chair sat almost completely behind the pillar. The view of the ceremony would be partially blocked. Anyone seated there would struggle to see the bride and groom. I looked around. The surrounding seats belonged mostly to distant acquaintances. Not family, not close friends, strangers. I forced a smile. I think there might be some confusion. The coordinator wouldn't meet my eyes. No confusion, ma'am. I felt my chest tighten. I'm Daniel's mother. Silence. The coordinator looked miserable, as though she wished she were somewhere else. I'm aware of that. Those 5 words hurt more than I expected, because they confirmed something. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a mix-up. Someone knew exactly who I was, and someone had placed me here anyway. I slowly sat down. The coordinator hurried away, leaving me alone. The ceremony would begin in 30 minutes. Guests continued arriving. Many took seats much closer to the altar. People I didn't recognize. People who had likely met Daniel only recently. People who certainly hadn't spent 18 years raising him. I kept smiling, pretending everything was fine, pretending I wasn't hurt, pretending I couldn't feel every passing minute. Then a familiar voice spoke behind me. Eleanor? I turned. It was Margaret Wilson, an old family friend, someone who had known Daniel since childhood. Her eyes widened when she saw where I was sitting. Eleanor, what are you doing back here? I laughed softly. The sound felt hollow. I suppose this is my seat. Margaret frowned. Your seat? She looked around. Then I looked toward the family section near the front. Confusion spread across her face. But you're his mother. Before I could answer, another voice interrupted. A male voice. Sharp, tense, familiar. Daniel, my son. He appeared beside us almost instantly, as though he'd been watching. His smile looked rehearsed. Everything about him looked perfect. Perfect tuxedo, perfect hair, perfect appearance. But his eyes betrayed something else. Panic. Mom. He hugged me quickly, very quickly. Then I stepped back. His attention shifted immediately to Margaret. We're about to start. His tone carried an unmistakable message. This conversation is over. Margaret glanced between us. Something in her expression changed. She understood. Not the details, but enough. She quietly excused herself. Daniel remained standing beside me. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked the question that had been growing inside me all day. Is this where you wanted me seated? His jaw tightened. Only briefly, then he smiled. It's just seating, Mom. Just seating. 3 months of planning, hundreds of guests. Every detail is carefully arranged. And somehow, this was just seating. I nodded slowly. Of course. Relief crossed his face, as though he was grateful I wasn't making things difficult. Then he glanced around nervously, checking to see who might be watching, checking to see who might be listening. And that was when I heard it, a sentence so quiet he probably didn't realize I caught it. He leaned slightly toward one of the wedding coordinators and whispered, I didn't want her drawing attention. My heart stopped. Not completely, just enough. Enough to feel it, enough to understand, enough to know exactly why my seat had been changed 3 times. I sat frozen as Daniel walked away. The ballroom blurred around me, the music, the laughter, the conversations. Everything faded into the background, because for the first time all day, the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. My son wasn't hiding me behind that pillar because there wasn't room at the front. He wasn't hiding me because of a seating mistake. He wasn't hiding me because of logistics. He was hiding me because he was ashamed of me. And somehow, the worst part of the day hadn't even happened yet. The ceremony was scheduled to begin at 4 o'clock. At 3:55, every seat in the ballroom was filled. Every seat except the one beside me. That chair remained empty. For reasons I couldn't explain, that hurt too. I sat quietly behind the massive stone pillar while hundreds of guests chatted around me. From where I sat, I could only see portions of the altar. The pillar blocked almost everything else. Every few seconds, I would lean slightly to one side just to catch a glimpse of the front. It felt ridiculous, like a child trying to watch a parade from behind a fence. I looked around the room. The family section near the front was full. Daniel's future in-laws occupied the first rows. Business associates sat nearby. Important guests, influential guests, people who looked as though they belonged in luxury magazines. I noticed several individuals I had never met, yet somehow they had better seats than I did. I forced myself not to dwell on it. Today was supposed to be about Daniel, not me. I repeated that sentence over and over, like a prayer, like medicine, like something I desperately needed to believe. The music shifted. Guests began settling into their seats. The wedding was about to begin. A young woman sitting across the aisle smiled warmly at me. "You look beautiful." I smiled back. "Thank you." She glanced toward the front. "Are you with the bride's family or the groom's?" The question was innocent, perfectly reasonable, but for some reason it felt like a knife. I hesitated, then answered. "The groom." Her face brightened. Oh, she looked toward the front row, then back at me. Confusion appeared instantly. I knew exactly what she was thinking. "If you're with the groom's family, why are you sitting back here?" I offered a polite smile before she could ask. The conversation ended there, but the damage was already done, because for the first time that day, I saw my situation through someone else's eyes, and it looked strange, very strange. The ceremony began moments later. The guests rose. The officiant took his place. Music filled the ballroom. Everyone turned toward the entrance. Everyone except me. I was still trying to position myself around the pillar, trying to find an angle that would allow me to see. The irony wasn't lost on me. A mother struggling to see her own son's wedding. Eventually, the bridal party entered. Applause echoed throughout the room. Guests smiled. Some wiped tears away. I should have been enjoying the moment. Instead, I found myself fighting something else. Embarrassment. Because every time someone glanced in my direction, I felt exposed. Not because they were staring, because I felt misplaced. Like furniture someone had forgotten to arrange properly. The ceremony continued. The vows began. The guests laughed during certain moments, cried during others, and I missed half of it. The pillar blocked nearly everything. At one point, I leaned so far sideways that the woman beside me quietly shifted her chair to give me more room. The gesture was kind, but humiliating. I thanked her. Then I looked away. My eyes burned, not from tears, from pride. The kind of pride that refuses to break even when it's wounded. Then something happened. A middle-aged couple seated nearby began whispering. At first, I ignored them. Then I realized they were talking about me. Not maliciously, just curiously. "I think she's related to somebody," the woman whispered. "Maybe an aunt." The man nodded. "Probably." I stared straight ahead, pretending not to hear, pretending their words didn't matter. But they did, because nobody guessed the truth. Nobody looked at me and thought, "That's the groom's mother." Nobody. And why would they? What mother gets seated behind a pillar? A bitter thought crossed my mind, one I immediately hated myself for. If my husband had been alive, would this have happened? Would Daniel have treated us this way? Or was it easier because I stood alone? I pushed the thought away. The answer wouldn't change anything. The officiant continued speaking. The bride and groom exchanged vows. The audience smiled. The photographers moved around the room capturing memories. And still, I sat hidden. Then I noticed something unusual. Several wedding staff members kept glancing toward me, not casually, deliberately, as though they knew something, as though they felt uncomfortable. Each time our eyes met, they quickly looked away. The behavior reminded me of Madison. The coordinator who had accidentally revealed my seat had been changed 3 times. Whatever had happened behind the scenes, more people knew about it than I realized. That thought settled heavily inside me because it meant this wasn't a last-minute decision. This wasn't random. This had been discussed, planned, approved. The realization made my stomach twist. Then another familiar voice appeared beside me. Eleanor. I looked up. It was Richard Benson, an old neighbor. Someone who had watched Daniel grow up. His expression changed immediately when he saw my seat. He glanced at the pillar, then toward the front, then back at me. His confusion was obvious. What happened? I laughed softly. Nothing happened. He didn't believe me. Neither of us did. Richard lowered his voice. Why are you sitting back here? I looked away because I didn't know how to answer. How do you explain something that doesn't make sense? How do you explain your own son hiding you? Before I could respond, another voice interrupted. Daniel's, again. He appeared almost instantly, like a man extinguishing a fire before it spreads. Richard. His smile looked forced. We need everyone seated. Richard frowned. We are seated. Daniel's smile disappeared briefly, only for a second. Then it returned, polished, professional, artificial. I mean, we should let everyone focus on the ceremony. The message was clear. Stop asking questions. Richard looked at me, then at Daniel. Something passed between them, something uncomfortable. Finally, Richard nodded and walked away. But before leaving, he squeezed my shoulder gently. The gesture nearly broke me, because it carried more warmth than my son's entire interaction. Daniel remained standing beside me. Neither of us spoke. Then he glanced around the ballroom, checking who was watching, checking who was listening, checking who might be paying attention. His eyes eventually settled on me. For a brief moment, I saw something there. Not anger, not cruelty, fear. Fear of being judged, fear of being embarrassed, fear that someone might connect him to the woman sitting behind the pillar. The realization hit harder than anything else, because suddenly I understood. This wasn't about me. This was about image, status, appearances. Daniel wasn't ashamed of who I was. He was ashamed of what I represented. The years before success, the years before money, the years before luxury, the years when we struggled, the years he'd spent trying to forget. Then, as he turned to leave, I heard something. A quiet conversation between Daniel and one of the coordinators, just a few feet away. Words he clearly didn't expect me to hear. The coordinator looked uncomfortable. Daniel looked irritated. Then he said it, the sentence I would never forget. Just keep her back there. My heart stopped. The coordinator hesitated. But she's your... Daniel cut her off. I know who she is. Silence. Then he added quietly, I don't want attention on her today. The words struck like a physical blow. Not because they surprised me, because they confirmed everything. Every suspicion, every uncomfortable feeling, every warning my heart had been trying to give me. For the first time all afternoon, I stopped wondering whether my son was ashamed of me and started wondering how long he had felt that way. What I didn't know was that someone else had overheard that conversation too. Someone sitting only a few rows away. Someone who was watching everything. someone whose presence would soon change the entire wedding and eventually change Daniel's life forever. The ceremony continued. The guests laughed, the bride smiled through happy tears. The officiant spoke about love, commitment, and family. Family. The word felt strangely painful now. I sat behind the pillar and stared ahead, not really watching, not really listening, just enduring. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped feeling embarrassed. Embarrassment implies uncertainty. Embarrassment asks, maybe I'm imagining this. Maybe there's another explanation. Maybe I'm being sensitive. But the moment I heard Daniel tell the coordinator to keep me behind the pillar, uncertainty disappeared. What remained was hurt, pure and simple, the kind of hurt that settles deep inside your chest, the kind that doesn't arrive loudly, it arrives quietly. Then stay. I folded my hands in my lap and focused on breathing. In, out, in, out. The ceremony was beautiful, at least from what little I could see. And despite everything, I wanted Daniel to be happy. That was the frustrating thing about being a mother. Love rarely disappears when it should. You keep loving people long after they've disappointed you, long after they've hurt you, long after common sense suggests otherwise. The guests rose for another portion of the ceremony. I shifted slightly in my seat to catch a glimpse around the pillar. For a moment, I could see Daniel clearly, standing beside Olivia, smiling. Confidence, successful, the picture of a man who had everything. And yet somehow, not once had he looked in my direction. Not once. The realization hurt more than the seating arrangement. Then I heard a voice, soft, gentle. Unexpectedly, "Excuse me." I turned. An older gentleman stood beside my row, perhaps in his early 70s, silver hair, expensive suit, perfect posture, the kind of man who carried himself with quiet confidence. His face looked vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place it. "May I sit here?" he asked. The seat beside me was still empty. I nodded politely. Of course. He thanked me and took the chair. For several moments, neither of us spoke. We simply watched the ceremony, or at least attempted to. Eventually, he glanced toward me. Then I looked again, longer this time. His expression changed, subtly, like someone recognizing an old photograph. "Eleanor?" My heart skipped slightly. I turned toward him. "Yes?" The man stared at me. Disbelief spread across his face. For several seconds, he said nothing, then slowly smiled, a genuine smile, not polite, not social, personal, emotional. I knew it. I frowned. "I'm sorry?" He laughed softly, a laugh filled with surprise. "I knew it was you." I searched his face. Still nothing. No memory, no recognition. The man noticed immediately. "You don't remember me." It wasn't a question. I felt embarrassed. I wish I could say I do. His smile widened. "That's all right." Then he looked toward the altar, back toward me, and shook his head. "I haven't seen you in almost 30 years. 30 years. The number stunned me. I studied him more carefully, searching, trying to uncover something familiar, anything. Still nothing. The man extended his hand. "My name is Thomas Walker." The name meant nothing, at least initially. I shook his hand politely. "It's nice to meet you." His smile became even larger. "No," he said quietly. "It's nice to see you again." Something about the way he said it made me pause. There was emotion in his voice, real emotion, the kind people struggle to hide. The ceremony continued around us, but my attention was now completely elsewhere. Thomas folded his hands, then asked a question, one that caught me entirely off guard. "Do you still carry peppermint candies in your purse?" I blinked. "What?" He laughed. The sound is warm and nostalgic. "Peppermint candies." Suddenly, my stomach tightened. Because I did. I always had, for years. Ever since Daniel was little. I slowly opened my purse, reached inside, and pulled one out. Thomas stared at the candy. Then I laughed again. This time there were tears in his eyes. Actual tears. Oh my goodness. I stared at him, completely confused. Thomas shook his head. "I can't believe it." "Believe what?" For a moment, he simply looked at me, as though he were trying to decide where to begin. Then he spoke. 30 years disappeared from his face. "I was living in my car." The words immediately caught my attention. Thomas looked toward the floor, lost in memory. It was 1994. My business has failed. My marriage had collapsed. I lost everything. The ballroom seemed to fade away. I listened carefully, completely absorbed. "I had nowhere to go," he swallowed. "No money, no home, no family is willing to help." His voice remained calm, but pain lingered beneath every word. "I spent 3 months sleeping in a car." My heart sank. Because despite not remembering him, I knew stories like that. I'd met people like that. People carrying invisible burdens. People one bad year away from losing everything. Thomas looked at me directly and smiled sadly. "One afternoon, I walked into your tailoring shop. A strange feeling spread through me. Recognition. Not of him, of the memory. My old tailoring shop. The tiny business George and I had struggled to keep alive. The place where we barely earned enough to survive." Thomas nodded, as though he could see realization forming. I hadn't eaten in 2 days. The room seemed quieter now, even though nothing had changed. I was exhausted, embarrassed, humiliated. His eyes glistened, and you noticed. I stared at him. Pieces began to move. Not fitting together yet, but moving. Thomas smiled softly. "You brought me coffee." The image flashed faintly through my memory. A tired man. A worn suit. A difficult afternoon. Still blurry. Still incomplete. Thomas continued. "You brought me a sandwich." Then he laughed. "And you pretended you had accidentally made too much lunch." Suddenly, something clicked. A memory. Tiny, faded, but real. A man sitting alone near the window, refusing help, trying to maintain dignity. I felt my breath catch. Thomas saw it immediately. "You remember?" I nodded slowly. Only a little, only fragments. But enough. Enough to know he was telling the truth. Then Thomas said something that made my chest tighten. "You probably don't remember what happened next." I shook my head. "No." His smile softened. "That's because it changed my life." I stared at him, confused again. "What do you mean?" Thomas looked toward the altar, then back toward me, and the emotion in his eyes suddenly became overwhelming. Because whatever story he was about to tell, it clearly mattered more than I could possibly imagine. And before he could continue, a wedding coordinator rushed over. The moment she saw Thomas, her entire demeanor changed. Professional, respectful, almost nervous. "Mr. Walker." The title caught my attention. Thomas nodded politely. The coordinator leaned down and whispered something in his ear. Something important, something urgent. Thomas listened carefully, then stood. Before leaving, he looked directly at me and smiled. A smile filled with gratitude. A smile that somehow felt larger than this wedding, larger than this moment, larger than anything I understood. Then he said 5 words that would change everything. "You saved my life, Eleanor." And before I could respond, he walked away. For several moments, I remained frozen in my seat. The sounds of the wedding drifted around me: applause, music, laughter. The officiant continued the ceremony, but my attention had completely shifted. "You saved my life, Eleanor." The words echoed in my mind again and again and again. I stared toward the aisle where Thomas Walker had disappeared, trying to understand, trying to remember, trying to connect the exhausted man from 30 years ago with the distinguished gentleman sitting beside me today. Nothing made sense, not yet. The ceremony continued for another 20 minutes. Guests smiled through tears. The bride and groom exchanged rings. Vows were spoken, promises were made. And somehow, through all of it, my thoughts kept returning to Thomas. "You saved my life." I couldn't remember doing anything extraordinary: a sandwich, a cup of coffee, a conversation. Surely that wasn't enough to change a life, was it? Eventually, the ceremony ended. The room erupted into applause. Daniel kissed his bride. Guests stood. Photographers rushed forward. The newly married couple began walking back down the aisle. Everyone smiled. Everyone celebrated. Everyone except me. Because for the first time all day, my focus wasn't on my son. It was a mystery that somehow involved my past. As guests began moving toward the reception ballroom, I remained seated, partly because I didn't want to get caught in the crowd, partly because I wasn't sure I wanted to attend the reception at all. Then I heard a familiar voice. "Mrs. Harrison." I looked up. A wedding coordinator stood beside me, the same young woman who had escorted me to the seat behind the pillar. This time she looked nervous. "I'm very nervous. Yes?" She shifted awkwardly. "Mr. Walker would like to speak with you." My heart skipped. "Thomas?" She nodded immediately. "He asked if you would join him in the private lounge." Private lounge. The word sounded expensive. The kind of thing venues reserved for important people. People like Thomas Walker. Not people like me. I hesitated. The coordinator smiled. "He's been very insistent." That made me laugh softly, for reasons I couldn't explain. I trusted Thomas. Perhaps it was the gratitude in his eyes. Perhaps it was the kindness in his voice. Whatever the reason, I stood and followed her. The private lounge overlooked the gardens behind the manor. Floor to ceiling windows, leather furniture, fresh flowers. A space designed for wealthy guests seeking privacy. Thomas stood near the windows. The moment he saw me, he smiled. A genuine smile, not polite, not social, grateful, deeply grateful. The coordinator quietly left, leaving us alone. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. Then Thomas gestured toward a chair. "Please." I sat, still confused, still searching his face for answers. Thomas lowered himself into the chair opposite mine, then sighed, not heavily, emotionally, as though he'd been waiting years for this conversation. "I never thought I'd see you again." I smiled politely. "I wish I remembered more." His laugh was warm. "That's exactly why I know you're the same person." I frowned. "What does that mean?" Thomas leaned back, then stared out the window, lost in memory. "When I walked into your tailoring shop 30 years ago," his voice softened. "I wasn't looking for help." He paused. "I was looking for a reason not to give up." The words settled heavily between us. Thomas continued. "My company has collapsed. My marriage was over. My house has been foreclosed. I was sleeping in my car." His eyes drifted toward the garden. I hadn't spoken to another human being in days. The sadness in his voice felt real, raw, even after all these years. "I remember standing outside your shop for almost 20 minutes. I listened quietly, completely absorbed. I wanted to come inside, but pride kept stopping me." He smiled sadly. I didn't want anyone seeing what I'd become. The irony wasn't lost on either of us, because I knew exactly what shame felt like now. Thomas continued. When I finally walked in, I wasn't there for tailoring. He laughed. I just needed air conditioning. I couldn't help smiling. He shook his head. You noticed immediately. I did? Oh, yes. His smile widened. You looked at me for 5 seconds and knew I was struggling. The memory grew slightly clearer. A tired man, worn shoes, defeated eyes, still blurry, but present. Thomas leaned forward. You brought me coffee. You brought me lunch. And then you sat down. I nodded slowly. That part sounded familiar, very familiar. Then Thomas's expression changed. More serious now, more emotional. And you told me something. I frowned. What? His eyes met mine directly. You told me that failure wasn't who I was. Silence. I stared. Thomas swallowed. You said failure was simply something that happened. His voice trembled, slightly. You said I still had value. My chest tightened, because suddenly I remembered not everything, just enough. Enough to hear my own words. Enough to recognize the conversation. Enough to realize he was telling the truth. Thomas smiled. I hadn't heard those words from anyone. The room felt smaller now, quieter, more personal. My wife didn't believe in me anymore. My partners didn't believe in me anymore. I didn't believe in myself anymore. His eyes glistened, but a stranger did. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then Thomas laughed softly. You even gave me $50. I nearly choked. What? You heard me. I stared, completely shocked. $50? Thomas nodded. I immediately started laughing. Not because it was funny, because it was impossible. 30 years ago, $50 was a fortune to me. George and I had struggled constantly. There was no way. Then I remembered, and my laughter stopped. I remembered the envelope, the emergency cash, the money I'd hidden for groceries. Thomas saw realization cross my face. You remember now. I nodded slowly. My heart is pounding. I remembered every bit of it. And suddenly I felt embarrassed because $50 seemed insignificant, tiny, almost meaningless. Thomas disagreed. It wasn't $50. I looked up, confused. Then what was it? His smile returned, the same grateful smile from earlier. It was hope. The words hit me unexpectedly hard. Hope. Such a small thing, such a powerful thing. Thomas stood and walked toward the window. For several moments, he looked out over the wedding grounds. Then he turned back toward me and said something that made my heart stop. 3 years later, I started another company. I listened carefully. It grew. His smile widened. Then it grew again and again. Only then did I begin understanding. Only then did the pieces start connecting. Thomas Walker wasn't simply successful, he was extraordinarily successful. The kind of successful people read about in business magazines. The kind of successful people have private lounges at luxury weddings. The kind of successful people entire industries recognize. Thomas nodded as though reading my thoughts. My company now employs over 4,000 people. I stared, speechless. And every single year, his eyes softened. I think about the woman who gave me a sandwich when nobody else would. Emotion flooded through me, unexpectedly, overwhelming. But before I could respond, someone knocked on the door. Thomas looked toward the entrance, then smiled. A very interesting smile. The kind of smile people wear when they know something you don't. Perfect timing. My stomach tightened. What do you mean? Thomas glanced toward the ballroom, toward the reception. toward the celebration happening beyond those walls. Then he said something that immediately made me nervous. Eleanor. His voice became serious. Have you ever wondered why Olivia insisted I attend every wedding planning meeting? I frowned. What? Thomas smiled again. And suddenly I realized something. Something enormous. Something impossible. Thomas Walker wasn't just another wedding guest. He wasn't a family friend. He wasn't a business associate. He wasn't some random attendee. He was connected to this wedding, connected much more closely than I had realized. And whatever role he played, it was about to change everything. For several seconds, I simply stared at Thomas. My mind was struggling to keep up. The pieces were finally beginning to fit together, but the picture they created seemed impossible. Thomas Walker, the homeless man from 30 years ago, the man I had helped during one difficult afternoon, the successful businessman, the respected guest, the man with access to private lounges and personal coordinators. And somehow, he was directly connected to this wedding. I looked at him carefully. Thomas. He smiled. You figured out part of it. I shook my head. No. I laughed nervously. I haven't figured out anything. That made him laugh, a genuine laugh, the kind that instantly made people comfortable. Then he walked back toward his chair and sat down. For a moment, he simply studied me, as though trying to decide how much to reveal. Finally, he spoke. My daughter talks about you constantly. I blinked. What? Thomas nodded. My daughter. My stomach tightened. Something inside me already knew, but I wasn't ready to accept it. Thomas. He smiled, then said the words that changed everything. Olivia is my daughter. The room suddenly felt very quiet. I stared at him. Certainly I had heard incorrectly. Olivia? The bride. My mouth actually fell open. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. I couldn't think, couldn't process what I'd just heard. Thomas watched my reaction with obvious amusement, then nodded. Surprised? I laughed. A short, stunned laugh. That's one way of putting it, because suddenly everything made sense. The private lounge, the respect from the staff, the importance, the influence. Thomas Walker wasn't merely attending the wedding. He was the bride's father, one of the most important people in the entire event. I sat back slowly, trying to absorb the revelation. Then another thought struck me, a troubling one. If Olivia is your daughter, Thomas nodded, then you've known Daniel for years. His smile faded slightly. Yes. I hesitated, then asked the question. Did you know I was his mother? Thomas sighed, slowly, thoughtfully. No. The answer surprised me. I didn't know until today. What? He nodded. This morning. I stared, completely confused. Thomas folded his hands. Olivia showed me some family photographs. His smile returned. And there you were. I felt my pulse quicken. The tailoring shop? One photograph from the shop. Thomas nodded. Another from Daniel's college graduation. His eyes softened. The moment I saw you, I nearly fell out of my chair. I couldn't help laughing. The image was absurd. Thomas Walker, business titan, corporate leader, falling out of a chair. The laughter faded quickly, because something else suddenly occurred to me. Something important. Something uncomfortable. You knew before the ceremony. Thomas became serious. Very serious. Yes. Silence. I felt a knot forming in my stomach. You knew who I was. Yes. And you saw where I was seated. The room fell silent. Thomas looked away briefly, then back at me. I did. The answer landed heavily, because now I understand. Thomas knew. He had seen everything. The pillar, the isolation, the humiliation. All of it. His expression darkened. Not with anger, with disappointment. Deep disappointment. I wish I could tell you there was a misunderstanding. I remained silent. Thomas shook his head. There wasn't. The words hurt, even though I already knew. Hearing someone else confirm it somehow made it real. Thomas leaned forward. Eleanor, his voice lowered. What happened to you today was wrong. For a moment, I couldn't speak, because nobody had said it. Not all day. Nobody had acknowledged it. Nobody had admitted it. Nobody except him. I looked down at my hands, suddenly emotional. More emotional than I'd allowed myself to be. Then Thomas continued. When I realized who you were, I started paying attention. His jaw tightened. I noticed where you were sitting. Silence. I noticed Daniel avoiding you. More silence. I noticed the staff acting nervous. The room felt smaller now. The truth fills every corner. Then Thomas sighed, and eventually I heard the conversation. I looked up immediately. What conversation? Thomas's expression hardened. The warmth disappeared from his face, replaced by something else, something colder. He told a coordinator to keep you behind the pillar. My heart dropped, even though I'd heard it myself, even though I already knew. Hearing Thomas repeat it made the wound deeper. Thomas shook his head slowly, almost in disbelief. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then Thomas looked directly at me. You know what's ironic? I frowned. What? His eyes softened. The woman who helped build my future. He paused. Then I finished the sentence. Was being hidden at her own son's wedding. The words hit me like a wave, because they were true. Painfully true. Thomas stood and walked toward the window again. For a long time, he stared at the gardens, then finally spoke. When I started my company, his voice remained calm. I built it around one principle. I waited. Character matters. He turned toward me. More than money, more than status, more than appearances. The words felt aimed at someone, not me. Someone else. Someone standing at a reception a few rooms away. Then Thomas smiled. A very small smile. The kind people wear when they've made a decision. A decision they cannot undo. Eleanor, his tone changed. Suddenly lighter, almost hopeful. I need to ask you something. I frowned. What is it? Thomas walked back toward me, then stopped. And for the first time all afternoon, I noticed something unusual. There was excitement in his eyes. Not anger, not disappointment. Excitement. The kind that appears when someone knows a secret. A very important secret. What would you do, he asked carefully, if you were given a chance to speak? I stared at him, completely confused. Speak. Thomas nodded, in front of everyone. My heart skipped. The question made no sense. Why would I speak? This wasn't my wedding. This wasn't my moment. This wasn't my place. I laughed nervously. I have no idea what you're talking about. Thomas smiled. A bigger smile now. Then he glanced toward the ballroom, toward the reception, toward the hundreds of guests celebrating beyond those walls, and quietly said, maybe it's time they learned who you really are. Before I could ask what he meant, the reception music suddenly stopped. And somewhere inside the ballroom, a microphone switched on. The music stopped. At first, nobody seemed concerned. Guests continued talking, waiters continued serving drinks. The reception ballroom remained filled with laughter and celebration. Most people assumed it was a technical issue, a temporary interruption, nothing more. But Thomas didn't look surprised. He looked prepared, very prepared. I stared at him. "What did you do?" His smile widened slightly. "You'll see." The answer immediately made me nervous because there was something calm about him. Too calm. The kind of calm people have when they've already made up their minds. Then a voice echoed through the ballroom speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen." Conversations immediately quieted. Guests turned toward the stage. The wedding band lowered their instruments. The photographers stopped moving. Within seconds, the room had fallen silent. I remained seated beside Thomas, still confused, still trying to understand what was happening. The voice continued. "May I have everyone's attention, please?" The speaker was the master of ceremonies, a professional hired to manage the reception. His smile looked unusually tense, as though he had been given instructions he wasn't expecting. Then he glanced toward Thomas and nodded respectfully. My stomach tightened. Thomas had arranged this. Whatever was happening, he was responsible. The MC cleared his throat. "We have a special request before dinner begins." Guests exchanged curious looks. Near the front of the ballroom, Daniel appeared confused. Olivia looked equally puzzled. Neither seemed to know what was happening. Then the MC said something that made the entire room freeze. "The groom would like to make a brief announcement." I frowned. "The groom?" Daniel immediately looked surprised. I was very surprised. He turned toward Olivia, then toward the stage, then toward the MC. His expression made one thing clear. He hadn't requested anything. The confusion spread quickly. Whispers moved through the ballroom. Questions, curiosity, speculation. Then suddenly another figure appeared. Not Daniel, Thomas. The room immediately reacted. Some guests sat straighter. Others smiled. Several people whispered his name. The level of respect was obvious. Thomas Walker was important. Far more important than I'd realized. He walked confidently toward the stage. The microphone was handed to him. And suddenly every eye in the room was focused on him, including mine. Thomas smiled politely. "Good evening, everyone." The audience responded warmly. He thanked the guests. Congratulations to the newlyweds. Shared a few brief words about love and family. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming. Then his tone changed, subtly, almost imperceptibly, but enough. Enough that I immediately noticed. "There is someone here tonight I'd like to recognize." The ballroom grew quieter. Daniel looked confused. Olivia looked curious. I felt my stomach twist, because somehow I knew. I just knew. Thomas continued. "Most of us spend our lives chasing success." Guests listened attentively. Money, status, recognition. He paused, then smiled. "But every successful life begins because somebody showed us kindness when we needed it most." A strange feeling spread through me. Thomas looked directly into the crowd, then continued. 30 years ago, I was a broken man." The room fell completely silent. No whispers, no movement, nothing. I had lost everything. My business, my marriage, my confidence, my future. Daniel slowly turned toward the stage, listening carefully now. Thomas continued. "I was sleeping in my car. Several guests looked shocked. Others exchanged surprised glances. The story clearly wasn't one they expected." Then Thomas smiled softly. "And one afternoon, a woman I had never met gave me a sandwich." A nervous laugh moved through the room. Thomas smiled. I'm serious. The audience laughed gently, but the emotion in his voice remained. She gave me food. She gave me coffee. And most importantly, his eyes drifted across the room, searching, until they found me. She gave me hope. My heart nearly stopped. Guests began looking around, trying to figure out who he meant, trying to find the mysterious woman. Thomas pointed directly toward the back of the ballroom, toward me. The room turned, hundreds of heads, all at once. I froze. My chest tightened. My breath caught. Because suddenly, everyone was looking at me. The woman hidden behind the pillar. The woman nobody noticed. The woman my son didn't want drawing attention. Thomas smiled warmly. There she is. The spotlight operator instinctively followed his gesture. A soft beam of light landed directly on me. Gasps rippled through the room. Daniel's face turned pale. Olivia looked stunned. I sat frozen, unable to move, unable to think, unable to understand how any of this was happening. Thomas stepped away from the podium, then descended from the stage. The entire ballroom watched. Every guest, every relative, every friend, every business associate. The room was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. Thomas walked past the head table, past the wedding party, past Daniel, past Olivia, past every important guest, straight toward me. Daniel looked terrified now, not angry, terrified, because for the first time all day, attention was no longer under his control. The whispers grew louder. Guests were clearly confused. Why was Thomas Walker walking toward the groom's mother? Why was he telling this story? Why did she matter? I remained seated, completely overwhelmed. Thomas stopped in front of me, then extended his hand, the same way a gentleman might invite someone to dance. Only this wasn't a dance. It was something much bigger, something much more public, something nobody would forget. His smile softened. Eleanor. My heart pounded. The ballroom waited, every eye fixed on us. Then Thomas spoke the words that changed everything. Would you come with me? The room went silent, and somewhere across the ballroom, I saw my son realize exactly what was about to happen. For a moment, I couldn't move. The entire ballroom seemed frozen. Hundreds of faces stared in my direction. The spotlight remained fixed on me. The music had stopped. The conversations had stopped. Even the waiters appeared frozen in place. Everything waited, everything, for me. Thomas still stood before me with his hand extended, patient, respectful, certain. I looked across the ballroom and immediately found Daniel. My son looked terrified, not angry, not embarrassed, terrified. Because for the first time all day, the attention he had worked so hard to avoid was happening anyway. Only now it was happening in front of everyone. I looked back at Thomas, then slowly placed my hand in his. The ballroom watched, every single person. Thomas helped me stand, and together we began walking. Not toward the back, not toward an exit, toward the stage, toward the center of the room, toward the place Daniel had spent the entire day trying to keep me away from. The irony wasn't lost on me. Several guests stepped aside as we passed. Others whispered. Many looked confused. Some looked emotional. Nobody understood the full story yet, but they knew something important was happening. I could feel it. When we reached the stage, Thomas offered his arm. I accepted, then carefully stepped onto the platform. The spotlight followed. The room remained completely silent. I had never felt so exposed in my life. Thomas walked to the microphone. The audience immediately focused on him. He waited a moment, then spoke. Many years ago, His voice echoed throughout the ballroom. I was a man who had lost everything. Silence. Absolute silence. Guests listened carefully. I lost my company, my marriage, my home, my confidence. He paused, then smiled softly. And eventually I lost hope. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Thomas turned toward me, then continued. One afternoon, I walked into a small tailoring shop. His eyes glistened. I wasn't looking for success. I wasn't looking for money. I wasn't looking for a miracle. He paused. I was simply trying to survive another day. The ballroom remained captivated. Every guest is hanging on every word. Thomas smiled. And then I met Eleanor Harrison. The audience looked toward me. Many are smiling now. Others nodded. The atmosphere had changed completely. Gone was the confusion. Gone was the curiosity. What remained was respect. Thomas continued. She didn't know who I was. She didn't ask what I could offer. She didn't care what I owned. His voice grew emotional. She saw a struggling human being. The room fell even quieter. If you've ever wondered whether kindness matters, Thomas paused, then pointed gently toward me. You're looking at the reason I'm standing here today. The audience erupted into applause. The sound startled me. I wasn't prepared for it. Hundreds of people clapped, hundreds of strangers. For me, the woman hidden behind the pillar, the woman nobody was supposed to notice. The applause continued and continued and continued. I felt tears forming, real tears, not from sadness, from disbelief. Eventually, the applause faded. Thomas stepped closer, then looked directly toward Daniel. Not aggressively, not cruelly, just honestly. Success has a strange way of confusing people. The room became still again. We start believing titles matter, money matters, status matters. His voice remained calm, but none of those things create character. Daniel looked down, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Thomas continued. Character is revealed by how we treat the people who helped us become successful. The words landed heavily. Everyone understood who he meant. No names needed, no explanations required. The entire ballroom knew. Thomas smiled gently, then turned back toward me. And that's why tonight isn't about me. The audience shifted their attention toward me once again. Thomas picked up a second microphone, then walked toward me. My heart pounded, because suddenly I understood. This was the moment from the title, the moment the entire story had been building toward, the moment nobody would forget. Thomas stopped in front of me, then placed the microphone into my hands. The ballroom held its breath, even Daniel, especially Daniel. I looked down at the microphone, then out at the audience. Hundreds of faces, waiting, listening, watching. For several seconds, I said nothing. The silence itself seemed powerful. Then finally, I spoke. My name is Eleanor Harrison. The room remained perfectly still. I am Daniel's mother. A ripple moved through the audience. Not because they didn't know, because now they understood. Understood who I was. Understood what had happened. Understood why this moment mattered. I smiled softly, then continued. Today has been a very emotional day. Several guests nodded. Others smiled sadly. I glanced toward Daniel, only briefly. Then I looked back at the audience. When my husband and I raised our son, my voice trembled slightly. We didn't have much. Silence. But we had enough. I smiled. Enough love. A few guests laughed softly. Enough hope. More smiles. Enough determination. I paused, then added, and apparently enough stubbornness. The audience laughed warmly, the tension eased, the room relaxed. Then I became serious. I spent many years believing success was measured by achievement. I looked toward Thomas, then smiled. But tonight reminded me that success is measured by something else. Silence. The audience listened carefully. The lives we touch, the people we help, the kindness we leave behind. I noticed several guests wiping away tears, including Olivia, including members of her family. Then I looked directly at Daniel, for the first time all evening. The entire room followed my gaze. Daniel froze. The spotlight wasn't on him, but it felt like it was. I smiled gently, not angrily, not bitterly, like a mother, just a mother. Then I said, "None of us should ever be ashamed of where we came from." The room went completely silent because everyone understood. Everyone. Daniel's eyes immediately filled with tears. I could see it, even from the stage. I continued, because the people who helped us during our hardest years, I paused, then finished, are often the reason we survive long enough to enjoy the good ones. For a moment, nobody moved, nobody breathed, nobody spoke. Then the entire ballroom stood. Every guest, every table, every family member. A standing ovation. Thunderous applause filled the room. People are cheering, people are crying, people are smiling. The sound echoed through the ballroom. And as I stood there holding that microphone, the same microphone my son never imagined I would touch, I realized something. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't humiliation. This wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about dignity. The dignity nobody can take from you, not even family. And as the applause continued, I looked toward Daniel and saw something I hadn't seen all day. Shame, real shame. Not because he'd been exposed, because he'd finally seen himself clearly. And at that moment, I knew the hardest conversation of his life was still waiting, and it would happen before the night was over. The applause seemed endless. Wave after wave of sound filled the ballroom. Hundreds of people stood, clapping, cheering, wiping away tears. For a moment, I simply stood there, holding the microphone, trying to absorb what had just happened. A few hours earlier, I had been hidden behind a pillar. Now an entire ballroom was standing for me. Life has a strange sense of humor sometimes. Eventually, the applause began to fade. Guests slowly returned to their seats. The band resumed playing softly. The reception started moving again, but something had changed. Not in the room, in people. You could feel it. The atmosphere was different now. Warmer, more honest, more human. Thomas stepped beside me and squeezed my shoulder, then quietly returned to his seat. Before leaving, he whispered something. "Never forget who you are." I smiled. For the first time all day, I didn't think I would. The remainder of the reception passed in a blur. Guests approached constantly. Strangers, friends, business leaders, family members, people I had never met, people who suddenly wanted to meet me. Not because of my son, not because of status, because of the story. Kindness, humanity. One woman cried while hugging me. Another guest told me I reminded her of her own mother. Several people thanked me for my speech. Every conversation felt surreal, because only a few hours earlier, most of these people didn't even know I existed. Eventually, dinner was served, and then something happened that almost made me laugh. The seating arrangements changed completely, without announcement, without discussion, without explanation. A coordinator approached me, smiling nervously. "Mrs. Harrison." "Yes." She handed me a new place card, a beautiful gold place card. I looked down, then I froze. The table number had changed significantly. I looked up, confused. The coordinator smiled. Your new seat. I followed her gaze toward the head table, toward the center of the ballroom, toward the most visible seat in the room, the seat beside Thomas, the seat beside Olivia's parents, the seat everyone could see, the seat I should have had from the beginning. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because the irony was overwhelming. The woman hidden behind a pillar was now sitting at the front of the room, and everybody knew exactly why. As I took my seat, I noticed Daniel watching. His expression was impossible to miss. Shame, regret, heartbreak. The kind of regret that arrives too late. Not because he had been embarrassed, because he finally understood what he had done. Dinner continued, the speeches resumed, the celebration carried on. But Daniel barely touched his food. Several times I caught him staring at me. Each time he quickly looked away, like a little boy who knew he was in trouble. Hours later, the reception finally began winding down. Guests slowly departed. The ballroom emptied, the music softened, the evening came to an end. I stepped outside onto the terrace, overlooking the gardens. The night air felt cool and peaceful. For the first time all day, I was alone. Or so I thought. A few moments later, footsteps approached. I didn't need to turn around. I already knew who it was. Daniel, my son, stopped beside me. Neither of us spoke immediately. The silence stretched between us, heavy, necessary. Finally, he broke it. I'm sorry. His voice cracked. The words sounded different now. Not rushed, not defensive. Real. I looked out across the gardens. The lights shimmered in the darkness. Then I asked quietly, for what? Daniel swallowed hard. For several moments he couldn't answer. Then the truth finally arrived. Not polished, not rehearsed, honest. I was ashamed. The words hurt, even though I already knew. Hearing them out loud was different. I was ashamed of where I came from. He lowered his head. I spent years trying to fit into their world. Silence. The money. The connections. The status. His voice shook. And somewhere along the way, he paused, then finished. I started treating my own history like something to hide. A tear rolled down his face. The sight shocked me, because Daniel rarely cried, even as a child. I looked at you, his voice broke, and instead of seeing the woman who sacrificed everything for me, more tears. I saw the part of my life I was trying to escape. The words hung in the night air, painful, honest, necessary. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then I finally turned toward him, really looked at him. Not a successful businessman, not the groom, my son. The little boy who used to fall asleep on my shoulder. The boy who once believed I could fix anything. The boy I had never stopped loving. You know what hurts the most? I asked softly. Daniel nodded. Tears filled his eyes. You thought I wanted credit. He frowned. What? I smiled sadly. You spent all day hiding me because you thought I represented poverty. Silence. But I never cared about your money. Another tear slid down his face. I know, I continued. I never wanted recognition. I never wanted status. I never wanted a special seat. The truth settled between us. I only wanted my son. Daniel closed his eyes, and for the first time all night, he began crying openly. Not dramatically, not loudly, quietly, like a man grieving the person he had become. For several moments, I let him cry. Then I stepped closer and wrapped my arms around him, just as I had done when he was little. The same embrace, the same comfort, the same love. Some things never change. Daniel held onto me tightly, like he was afraid to let go. "I'm sorry, Mom." His voice was barely audible. "I know." We stood there for a long time, neither of us is rushing the moment. Eventually, he stepped back, wiping his eyes. Then something unexpected happened. He smiled, a small smile. The first genuine smile I'd seen from him all day. Thomas was right. I laughed softly. About what? Daniel shook his head. Character matters more than status. The words sounded different coming from him, because now he understood them. Not intellectually, personally. The lesson had finally reached his heart. As we walked back toward the ballroom, I glanced through the windows one last time. The room was nearly empty now, but something caught my eye. The giant decorative pillar, the same pillar where I had spent the ceremony hidden from view. I stopped walking. Daniel noticed, then followed my gaze. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he quietly said, "I'll never forget that pillar." I smiled. Neither will I. But the truth was, it no longer mattered, because sometimes life places you behind a pillar so you can discover something important. Not about other people, about yourself. That day taught me something I wish everyone understood. Never allow someone else's embarrassment to become your identity. Never allow another person's insecurity to define your worth. And never forget where you came from, because the people who truly matter won't judge your story. They'll honor it. The greatest irony of that wedding wasn't that my son seated me behind a pillar. It was that the very thing he tried to hide became the thing everyone respected most. And in the end, the woman hidden behind the pillar received the only seat that truly mattered, the one she had earned all along, a place of dignity, a place of respect, a place nobody could ever take away. Thank you for spending this journey with me. And if this story touched your heart, remember, never be ashamed of the people who helped build your life. One day, you'll realize they're the greatest part of your success. And by then, you'll hope it's not too late to tell them. Before you go, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been treated like an embarrassment by someone you sacrificed everything for? Maybe a son, maybe a daughter, maybe a spouse, maybe a family member who forgot the struggles that helped build their success. If you were Eleanor, how would you have reacted when you discovered your own son had hidden you behind a pillar at his wedding? Would you have left immediately, or would you have stayed and watched the ceremony? And be honest, do you think Daniel deserved forgiveness after what he did? I read every comment, and your stories often remind others that they are not alone. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Here, we share powerful stories about family, betrayal, resilience, forgiveness, dignity, and the quiet strength of people who refuse to let hardship define them. Remember, never be ashamed of the people who stood beside you before success arrived. One day, you may discover they were the reason you reached success at all. Thank you for spending this time with me. Until our next story, take care of yourself and never forget your worth.